Should we go?
We do have a quorum. I'll just run down the list here. We have
Okay.
Bob Lyons, Robert Burke did join us. Dan Cody, I do not see. Don Knorr is here. Carrie Schuffner, Carl Stumpf, Susan West. So we're just missing the one member that I can see.
Well, why don't we get started and he can join us in progress. Is that acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
All right, then I'll call this meeting of the Public Works Committee to order. We have a quorum, so we can do business. The first item on our agenda is minutes of February 22nd, 2021.
Move approval. This is Susan.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Robert.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion with respect to the minutes? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it and the minutes are approved. Second item is concrete repair project, award of a bid.
I'll slow us down just a second here to announce that Dan Cody has joined us.
Okay.
I don't see his video or a microphone on just yet, so he may be still connecting.
No, I'm here.
Mike's good. Okay.
Hi, Dan.
We got started right away here, didn't we?
Right on the dot. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Don't be a minute late.
So we're just starting discussion
no,
on number 2 here. Okay.
We just did the minutes.
Yep, I heard that. I could hear you guys before I actually got on.
Okay. All right.
Did you want, Dan, your vote to count in favor of the minutes, or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I did. I did vote for that.
I'll record that. Thanks. Good to know. Okay, sorry about the interruption there.
Oh, that's awesome. So for the concrete repair project, it sounds like you're just recommending the low bid.
Correct. Yep. Mhm.
And
I was
the
a
only
little
question-
surprised to see Farner Asphalt Sealers is in the concrete business now, but apparently they got their own crew and started in on that, which is great. There's been a real shortage of concrete contractors for several years now.
Sean, can I ask a question about this, a question or two about this? What exactly are these miscellaneous projects? Can you
These are-
identify a couple of them anyway?
Yeah, you bet. This is largely our incidental repairs and replacements of sidewalks that are tripping hazards or caused by tree root heaves. So it's literally an eighth of the city, 1 square here, 2 squares there.
So this is sidewalk repair.
This is mostly sidewalk repair.
Okay.
There's a little bit of curb and gutter and an occasional driveway apron, but the bread and butter is
Because
sidewalk.
we've had other years when we hardly got any bidders on the sidewalk, right?
That's right. Yep.
Can I ask one other thing? Could you go to the bid tab thing for 1 second?
Sure. There. All right.
A little bit further down the actual, I think he's looking for the Excel
Oh,
spreadsheet.
Yeah,
The
that's,
tab. Okay.
that now I can't see it.
Let me zoom in just a skosh.
I know what I want to ask. I hate to show my ignorance, but what is concrete high early?
That is, it's really called high early strength. So it's a kind of concrete that sets up really quickly and gains its strength so that you can drive on it sooner.
Okay.
We'll usually use that in a commercial driveway if they only have one driveway and we just can't keep it out of service for very long. We'll look into that.
Okay, that answers my question.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I have a question also. And there's a neighbor in my district who has on Middleton Street has like 2 or possibly 3 squares that are rocking, back and forth because they're riding up on top of roots. It's literally, the square itself is fine. It's a perfect square or rectangle or whatever. No cracks anywhere. But obviously it's its own trip hazard, and they're marked with pink paint.
Right.
So the question in my mind is, would this group, who deals with something like that where it's probably more than just pouring new concrete? It is, and chopping out the old one. It's maybe taking some roots out and doing some other things. Is that something that more City of Middleton staff would handle, or would somebody like this Farner Asphalt also do something like that?
Yeah, that's actually part of this contract work. So pink dots typically mean we're replacing those, not trying to grind off a lip or mud jack them to level it. This is
Sure.
replacement when it's pink. And the reasoning behind what you're describing is so that we can cut the tree roots, put some base back in, and pour it with concrete again.
Okay.
Maple trees are awful for that. They're beautiful trees, but the roots just mess with the sidewalk. And years ago, the council changed our assessment to assess those at 50% instead of 100%.
Sure.
This was marked, I know what Robert's talking about. These were marked last year and they got missed somehow last year. They didn't get done last year. And it's when you look at it, it's new concrete too. They were replaced 3-4 years ago. And it's not a maple tree that's the guilty party, it's a linden tree.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, they rock back and forth when you walk over them. A couple of them.
There's more
Yeah,
excitement than we need.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay, so that helps. I just wanted to understand the scope of service for this group, and that's good to know that they would take on that kind of duty as well, as to cut roots and reset down the whole base as well as the concrete. So thank you.
Sure. Okay.
I would make a motion to recommend Farner Asphalt Sealers as the low bid for the concrete repair projects within Middleton.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is carried, and that will be our recommendation to the Finance Committee and the Council. Okay.
Next up on the agenda, oh golly. We have the draft request for proposals for the reconstruction design this year, actual reconstruction work next year, of Middleton Beach Road and the portion of Mendota Avenue that's east of Allen Boulevard. And we don't often come to the committee with the scope in a request for proposal, but Middleton Beach Road is sort of it's kind of a unique situation over there. And it has been in and out of staff programming for literally decades. So it's back in, and this time I think we get to build it. Now, the reason we've highlighted a bunch of parts of the scope of work is we want to try to figure out how best to frame the project for our consultants so that they have an understanding of what our scope intention is and can base their fee on that accordingly. But then also it's going to lead into next year's budget request for the road itself. So it's kind of intended as a series of questions and discussion points that we highlighted, but there may be other points that you want to provide input onto.
Do you want to go through the highlighted areas first, or hear a couple questions that I have?
whichever way you prefer to do it.
Yeah, I don't
Fine
mind.
by me.
Yeah.
Dan, why don't you go with your questions? I'm kind of curious.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So on the early page here, there's a comment made where it does not, it includes the sanitary sewer force main, but later in the document, it says that there is no sanitary sewer.
None
I'm
of the
trying to
gra-
understand.
Oh, sorry. None of the gravity main will be replaced or is up for design of replacement, which actually runs through people's backyards in an easement. It's nowhere near the road. So we
Okay.
do need the sanitary force main replaced, but none of the gravity main.
Okay. And then there was further down in the document, there's a place where you're talking about cost for further meetings, further things to reconcile differences and stuff like that. And I thought maybe maybe to specifically mention the DNR, because I think they'll be one of the principles that will go into that discussion.
I think that's especially true if we get into a lot of stormwater management kinds of issues. I think the utility stuff is going to be really straightforward and probably not require a meeting at all, but the stormwater / wetland stuff
Yeah.
might require some conversation and or a meeting. We typically don't try to describe those as committee / public meetings as much as interagency and staff meetings, because we have a lot of staff meetings with our consultant, but we don't count them as meetings per se. It's just all part of the design.
Okay. Okay. That wouldn't be like a public meeting or something.
Yeah, we try to focus more on those where we know it's going to be an evening thing outside of their normal work hours, and or with, say, the neighborhood, where we're getting input and they have to come to that. And we don't always guess the right number, but those are a couple of the highlighted bullets too.
Yeah. So the DNR would be the authority for any like drainage into the lake and things like that would have to be thought through. Okay.
That's right.
Then one last thing, when you talked about Lake Street not going through,
Right.
with the truck traffic,
Yeah.
with the truck traffic coming in there, wouldn't you want a temporary, because there's no way to turn around, I don't think, for a big truck.
There is.
Is there?
Mhm.
Where would that be?
Yeah, there's turnarounds at the end.
Yeah. The south one is really small, but the north one is fair sized. But we do actually want, and it might be one of the discussion points, a temporary connection to Lake Street, just because when we're replacing water main anywhere along this project, that's going to be the entire width of the road is going to be gone. And anybody north of that isn't going to be able to go home or leave then.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know how big the trucks are going to be that are coming in here, but the turnarounds are like just a residential dead end type situation. It might be hard for the trucks to turn around if they're big. You got some big stuff coming in.
Yeah, and the north one's not bad, but the south one is really little.
Okay. Yeah, those are my comments.
Okay.
I have only one comment, and that's, I think it's the second highlight. It is not anticipated that the design will include curb or sidewalk improvements. Isn't that kind of inconsistent with what we're going to be talking about next?
It is. From a certain perspective, yes, it is. It's just that
your memo of last year of January basically says it is the city's general intention that the citywide sidewalk system be developed so that all residents have reasonable access to the sidewalk system and that pedestrians are separated from vehicles. We got shorter dead ends in Stonefield that have sidewalks.
right. Part of what I was pre-thinking here is that on the east side of Middleton Beach Road in particular, it's almost all driveways with some power poles here and there. So sidewalk would be very difficult to design with all those driveways and still get drainage. But on the west side, it's mostly used for parking. before it drops into the ditch in the wetland area. So to get a sidewalk west of the parking area might also be difficult at best, right? And then getting that sidewalk cleared, I'm sure would be its own challenge, because it would be on the opposite side of where anybody lives.
Sean.
Well, why
can
don't we
even-
just leave that sentence out and have the design people look at it, rather than setting this kind of a precedent by telling them not to.
I agree with that too, that it might be good to analyze it first before it's ruled out.
Okay.
If I just want to share one comment, but go ahead. Susan, was that you?
Yes, I guess my concern, I'm fairly familiar with the people down there. We're going to have a fight, I'm sure, over sidewalks, but my bigger concern is if we put a sidewalk on the west side, how much conservancy land are you going to have to take to do that? And will it actually go over into the wetland?
Well, there's, two different answers to that. One, I think we have a lot of right-of-way over there, not conservancy land. The right-of-way goes out into the ditch. So when you get into the second part of that, where do we encumber the wetland? The wetland is in the right-of-way.
So the DNR would have a problem with that.
I think without mitigation, yes.
Okay.
So a bit we're threading the needle. We have a lot of right-of-way, but we can't use very much of it.
Could we get estimates on with and without sidewalks on each side?
We can
Or
have
would that take too
we-
much?
We can have a designer look into it. I mean, it's going to cost us something to do that. And I know from previous conversations over the past 20 years, it will be wildly unpopular. And I think for some good reasons over here,
Mhm.
just because of all the way the driveways are set up. But I'm absolutely open to looking at it.
Sean,
Yeah,
I
I would
had
like
one
to see
comment
both
about
there.
that highlighted area too. The areas for roadside parking, or improve the stability of the grass parking lanes along the west side of Middleton Beach Road. If there are going to be some parking areas, I think it would be preferable if they are paved rather than grass areas, because the grass area ones turn out just to be mud holes a lot of the time. And this is a pretty wet area. And I would think that might just be all rutted and muddy most of the time. It might be better if there were some designated areas for parking that were paved.
Okay. So we could take out the reference to the stabilized grass area and just let it be paved parking.
How would you stabilize the grass areas? I don't understand that.
Well, there are a couple of things that can be done. GeoGrid or geotextile fabrics can help with that. We could put in some essentially buried base course and put topsoil dressing on top of that. They have paver blocks that grass can grow through.
Then those are going to have to be mowed.
They still would have to be mowed, yes.
And who does that? The city or the property owners?
We go through there with our tractor mower
Well,
and mow that area. We mow that whole west side of right-of-way.
I just think if you're going to have designated parking areas, they would be better off paved or at least, crushed gravel or something rather than just dirt, because they tend to get just to be.
I think some of those blocks where the grass grows through them are pretty successful. I've seen those used for fire access roads and those kind of things. They're pretty nice, actually.
And they
Yeah,
would
but you're
tend
building
to,
everything on muck and mire in that area. It's just going to sink.
And it isn't rutted as badly as I would have guessed, but it does tend to be light vehicles and light boat trailers over there. So maybe they just don't rut it up as badly as I would have expected. But it still could use some improvement.
Well, it's probably similar to the area along Stricker Pond on Middleton Street, where there are people who park in the grass off on that would be the west side of Middleton Street. And
Yeah,
that's all rutted up and muddy now from people sinking into the mud and then leaving, and you leave a big rut behind you, and it's kind of a mess.
sure.
But I think that's likely to be the same thing over there.
And this area is pretty much all peat and flat. So,
I drove it yesterday and there were 2 or 3 cars parked on that side of the road, and they were parked on the road, not in the grass.
Hmm.
They
I don't
just,
blame 'em.
it just narrows the road down to 1 lane.
I was even thinking about, you think about the person that's closest to the athletic club. He has to enter on Mendota and drive all the way in. And when he leaves, he's got to drive all the way out. For someone in the middle or on that end of the subdivision, a one-way street would be nice, because then they could always enter from the same side. For them, the distance would actually be less. Others, it would be more. But then if it was a one-way road, you could have a parking lane, a walk lane, and a driving lane, maybe, if there was enough width there. And maybe that wouldn't be so terrible for the owners if they knew they were getting a decent parking pavement and a walkable lane and stuff like that. It doesn't look like it would. Some people are going to have to drive more, the ones that are closest to Mendota Ave. But for the rest of them, I think they would be indifferent to it.
Sean,
I don't know. Just a thought.
I like that idea, Dan.
Yeah.
Is there any issues with the people on Lake Street opening up that cul-de-sac onto Lake Street?
Well, I've only read notes in the file, but the opposition to keeping that intersection all came from Middleton Beach Road, not from Lake Street at the time.
Okay,
And that's going back to, I want to say that was in the early 80s that was disconnected with a cul-de-sac.
so that's something that maybe should be reviewed.
It could be, yeah, we could bring it up to the neighbors and see what the,
Do we still
thinking
own
is-
the right of way of the old road?
yeah, that goes all the way to Lake. Mhm.
I mean, that might be a wise thing, is to bring this up to the neighbors, because it sounds like we've got several options, but it might be good for them to provide input before we seek the bid.
And would you have a preference as a committee whether that one way north of Mendota is northbound or southbound?
I wouldn't know the answer to that.
I
Okay.
think
It'd be a traffic study, I
southbound
think.
might be safer, because there's less traffic on the other side. There's no businesses on the other side on southbound, because it comes out at Lakeview Park instead of in the middle of the shopping center.
Okay, well, I'll bring that up to the neighbors. That's
portion
an
of
interesting idea.
Middleton Beach Road south of Mendota Avenue, though, would have to be 2-way. There's no exit there.
Right.
Yeah, I see that. That's not going to work on that side unless they enter into the park or something, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
Yeah. All right.
I had a comment, but mine's about sidewalks, so we can continue to talk about this otherwise.
Was there any other discussion with respect to the notion of making it a one-way street with a parking lane and a walking lane? That would, if that flies, that would take care of the sidewalk issue too, perhaps.
I do think it's wise to ask the residents in this area. I mean, if we're throwing out some pretty new options that nobody's ever really maybe thought about before, I think that's a great thing to bring to the residents and see what they say. I haven't given it a lot of thought myself, so I'm not quite sure how a one-way street would work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think these are all great. I mean, I don't think we should restrict the design people, you know, in terms of giving them a narrow concept or scope.
Well, I'm in favor of bringing the citizens in and letting them know what we're considering as soon as possible in the process. I think it will be that's just much more considerate of them.
Yeah.
And will save us a lot of grief later on when we haven't told them and then we decide on something and they're not happy.
I think, Susan, I agree with that, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not letting that influence our decisions based on, the design recommendations and all those kind of things. And I think that's
Right.
why I think it's important to keep the sidewalks in as an option. Because even
Yeah,
though we
well,
know,
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
We can keep the sidewalks in as an option and let them respond
Yeah.
to it.
The trouble we have with the south side of Middleton Beach Road on the other side of Mendota, having to go both ways, that's also not adjacent to the wetland, correct? So there might be
Correct.
more we could do there with the width of the street.
Mm-hmm. It's adjacent
And
to the hockey
park.
fields, soccer fields, and it's a shorter distance.
That
Is
extra
that a
parking,
private
could be used by the park quite a bit.
Is that a private soccer field?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, because there's no trespass signs on it.
No.
But we still have a right of way there, right, along it?
We do. Yep.
Okay.
Mendota Avenue is fairly narrow. That's 49.5 feet, but Middleton Beach Road is 66.
Okay.
All right, any further comments? Or Sean, was there anything you wanted to discuss about any of these other highlighted areas?
Well, since I'm at this one, so I'm feeling that there's a consensus to leave sidewalk in, or more effectively delete it from the RFP as a consideration, so that a consultant would, per typical policy, look into it.
Right.
What about curb? Is there feeling on, it wouldn't be barrier curb because there's just no grade to make that work, but ribbon curb or not?
Could you describe
Sure.
the difference?
Yeah.
Ribbon curb would be effectively just a flat ribbon of concrete that holds the pavement edge, the asphalt
Okay.
pavement
Okay.
edge constraint,
So that's
raised.
what's around Frank Lloyd Wright
but no head.
on the pond
That's
side.
right. On the pond side of Frank Lloyd Wright is ribbon curb. So water just flows right across it.
Yeah, okay. It's mainly there for road structure then.
It just helps keep the edge from maybe cracking
Eroding.
off.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a fairly pricey consideration. So I don't
Is
know.
it more pricey than continued road construction for people parking at the edge of asphalt and having it just keep cracking away from the weight of cars? What do you know? Do you have an estimation of what's more cost effective?
What we have right now without any curb, just some gravel shoulder that's sort of overgrown with grass and weeds, I would say is reasonably held together.
Okay, thank you.
And it's been there a very long time.
Sure. Okay, that helps
So-
me. Thank you.
I have a question. We've had a lot of discussion, modifications, looking at this, looking at that, having the engineer evaluate this, evaluate that. How is he going to come up with an engineering cost for the full design without knowing what he's going to design?
I think some of these issues, like whether we look into sidewalk or not, is very common. All reconstruction projects that are missing sidewalk, we ask them in preliminary design, look at a couple options of sidewalk. If we don't select it in final design, they don't flesh it out. They don't put it into the construction contracts.
Okay,
The amount of hours that staff will spend looking into sidewalk should be reasonable. But if we ask them to look into it, they'll expect to be paid something for it.
okay. I just want, because at the end of the day, I can just see that, well, we really didn't have that in our price.
Yeah, and we normally don't get into where they should think about sidewalk. We just say, show us an option with sidewalk in preliminary design. And
How about the one-way versus two-way with parking and bike or walking paths or sidewalks on the west side? I mean, we've
yeah.
thrown out a lot of options here, and I can imagine a public hearing being required for this, where you get the public input on what they want, since they obviously have a big voice, they're big taxpayers in the city.
Yeah, my initial thought was more that we would have a neighborhood meeting to get this kind of input instead of a public hearing per se,
Sure, I understand.
to try to get the alderperson and as many neighbors as we could. And they do have a strong advocate in this neighborhood. Ginny Corwin has been helping gather input from a variety of neighbors and sort of consolidate some of it and get it to us. So that's been really helpful from a staff perspective, but we want to hear from neighbors in general too.
So
And
given
probably
that-
early on.
So yeah, given that, it may including at least that meeting as part of your list of meetings
Mhm.
within this RFP.
Yeah. So when we get down to that, I think I included specifically that as a neighborhood meeting in preliminary design.
Okay,
And you would anticipate doing that, Sean, before the RFPs went out?
No, after the designer has had a chance to look at that and get into it a little bit, maybe even after they've done some survey, then come and talk to the neighbors about, let us know their hopes and dreams for this. And that's a good time for us to mention, here's a couple of options we're thinking about. What's your feedback on these options? So that'll be a good way to collect some focused input instead of just a blank piece of paper. What do you want?
Right.
Very few people can answer that question.
Why didn't you highlight the Middleton Beach Road Plato survey dated 2010? Is that an issue?
It isn't the survey so much. That's the best information we could get. It's sort of the last phrase there: to design the improvements within the existing right-of-way. There are 3 major plats that went into Middleton Beach Road. Each of them has a significant offset. So instead of the right-of-way lining up, let me find some neutral color here. Instead of the right-of-way sort of lining up, it's offset. And so we kind of have to thread our way through some of these offsets to fit a road in there. We have talked to neighbors several times about trying to acquire and vacate slivers to get a uniform width that's continuous throughout Middleton Beach Road, and haven't been at all successful in meeting that as a goal. So that's why this is highlighted, is do we want to go through that exercise again? Which could take a lot of consultant time, staff time, neighborhood time, and get into a whole acquisition process with eminent domain, or just design within what we do have and get some new blacktop out there.
It's in pretty bad shape, so.
It is, and it was the first road I surveyed in 1994 when I started. Nothing's been done since.
Keep the speed down.
Even that doesn't seem successful, and it's the people that live there, but they'll still call and complain that people are going too fast. And I thought, not visitors, or random drive-throughs. Anyway, so that's probably a really big question in terms of scope, is do we want to have a consultant look into what it would take to acquire right-of-way slivers and do some vacations to get a continuous right-of-way through here?
As much as I would love to have nice straightaway roads with no clean easements on file, I would probably say no. I think that will just hold up. It'll add cost to the project and hold up our ability to actually put repairs in place on a road that desperately needs it. So I would leave the section in as written, personally.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Or is there consensus on that?
Do you have any idea, Sean, what it might cost to have them look at that?
I'm trying to think. The last time we did that was probably about 2010, and I can't remember what that cost ended up being. I don't know. It probably was in the, just guessing here, 10 or 15,000 range.
Just to have them examine the question, not to go out and try to acquire additional right-of-way or anything.
To lay out the shapes and do the neighborhood contact and all that. The acquisition itself, I think we had initially estimated, this is years ago, at about $80,000, give or take. So probably for $100,000, we could ask the question and take care of it.
Mhm.
Well,
Is that something, could you bring that up at the public meeting just as a agenda item, just to talk about?
Well, the last time we got into this, most of the neighbors whose property would not be affected were all in favor of it. And it turned out the neighbors whose property would be affected weren't exactly chomping at the bit to sign anything.
Would it be appropriate to just see what the design people think about it?
We could ask them. The harder part is if we don't put it into the scope of work, it would be an amendment. I mean, we could pursue it that way to say, what would you charge us to look into this? And come back with an amendment later.
I mean, I'm not sure that I understand the issue all that well. So I'm saying let the design people say, can't make this thing work without doing that, or if the compromise is really significant, and then go from there.
Sure. Or I could modify this to say, look, this is our base intention for your scope of work. But if we change that at some point, that'll just be an extra.
Yeah. It doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, because I was wondering, Sean, if there's extra costs to have to work within this existing right of way. You know, kind of what's the cost benefit of trying to get it more aligned, like you were talking about? Like
my first thought is that in those areas where the offsets are in the right of way, we probably will have to have a gap in parking lane, or else choose to, if we're parking on the west side of the road, that's city-owned land over there, we could just choose to put part of our parking lane outside the right of way and into city parkland, which just happens to come over. A different option would be to just put a gap in the parking lane at those offsets. And it depends a little bit else what we're trying to put in there. So if we're trying to put a sidewalk in over there, that might just require either right of way or easement in which to build that, depending on which side of the road it's on, I guess. Yeah, so that's part of the difficulty of Middleton Beach Road in a nutshell. It almost depends on what you're doing to see if you can do it.
Is there private property that encroaches into the road, or the other way around? Is the road encroach into any? I'm looking at a plat map and it actually shows the road intersecting part of a lot, couple lots.
Yeah. In a couple spots, well, in one spot that I can think of, the road crosses onto private property. And I don't know if the road pre-existed. I guess I'd have to go back a step beyond that. The original road isn't where the road is now. Right of way. The original right of way started life in a different spot. And through some acquisitions and vacations, it ended up where it is. But whoever did those vacations didn't fully understand what they were doing, clearly. And that's why we have offsets there. I don't fully blame the original surveyor, although I'm not sure that they're in the clear. But there was a lot of property transaction going on in these rights of way too. And I think that's where the major problem came in. So yes, there's some pavement on private land, and the pavement might have been there first. And there are some structures that are encroaching into the right of way. Some of the garages come out far enough that they're in the right of way.
I can see that, yeah.
I don't think we're going to do anything about that.
All right, any other comments about this issue, or how do we want to lead this? We got to give Sean some direction here.
Sean, is right now the understanding that you have is that we're basically in concept saying we're ready to make a motion to recommend this request for proposal with only like 1 or 2 changes, correct?
Well, no, we've got more highlighting to talk our way through.
Okay, well,
but for this bullet, I would say that mostly what I've heard was, if we massage this text to say our intended scope is to work with an existing right-of-way, but if right-of-way acquisition becomes necessary or desired through choices that get made during preliminary design, we'll need an amendment for extra services.
that makes sense to me.
I think so.
Yeah, especially like you said, Sean, if we do have them look into sidewalks and they have to look into that. So I think that's I like that approach.
Yeah, then at least it's a choice we're making and saying, they're not left holding the bag to say, well, because you wanted sidewalks, I have to go get right of way. So, okay, so then the second bullet, we pretty much talked about deleting sidewalks from here so that it is a desired preliminary design element. What about curb? Do we want ribbon curb, or just tell them to skip it? Or do we care? It's not a huge design cost.
I vote leave the phrase in there. It is not anticipated that the design will include curb improvements.
Okay.
We have some ribbon curb, I believe, over on that same Middleton Street I was just talking about earlier in the evening,
Yeah.
leading down into Strickers
Mhm.
Pond. And it's very, very nice, but I can see how that probably adds a lot of cost with probably not a lot of added benefit. So
Doesn't it strengthen the pavement though? And
it
prevent
does.
that breaking off? Because we've got a lot of it in Middleton Hills, and I think it's been beneficial. Don, you might want to comment.
I would agree. It's totally beneficial.
Yeah, I was going to say, could we have them design it with the ribbon curb and we could see the cost?
We can at least try. Part of what I was a little concerned of is with ribbon curb, we want it to have a nice, continuous, smooth profile. This east side is almost all driveways, and I'm a little bit concerned that we might not get the driveways to mesh in with the curb very well.
Could you put it on one side, Just the side that's going to get degraded on the soft side of the road, the
We
west side?
could, that'd be an option too. Again, it's not a huge design cost to draw a couple
Mhm.
extra parallel lines one way or the other and put it in a cost estimate, and then we can choose later.
Draw a detail on.
Yeah. it's
Ribbon
not a-
curb are separated out for each side.
Yeah, we can just make a choice later then.
Okay.
If we look at the road, is there a lot more damage on the west side of the road than the east side?
Yes.
So
I-
maybe the ribbon curb on one side would be good from that standpoint.
Yeah, I can't say which side is in tougher shape. Kind of the whole thing's in really poor condition.
I mean, the side toward the lake is, a lot of it's been rebuilt because it's mostly driveways. And a lot of those homes have been I mean, the old houses have been torn down and new ones have been built.
Right. But that's fine. I'll just take that
Have
whole
it all
sentence off.
chopped up on that east side of the road so that you just have little hunks where there are 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 feet of ribbon curb. That, you know, when you get the driveways heave or sink a little bit, or the ribbon curb heaves or sinks a little bit, and then you end up with places that have puddles of water that don't drain.
Well, and that we already have.
Yeah.
I don't know any great way around it other than to try to reset the cross slope on it. This whole thing has to drain to the west into the ditch. None of it's going to drain into the lake. The backyards just aren't conducive to that. But I'm fine with just taking that whole sentence out then. Again, preliminary design of curb is not pricey.
Okay, let's do that.
And do you want me to take out the grass parking lane as an option to look at and just go with pavement
Yes.
where we're going to have it? I'm hearing yes.
I heard- That was me, yes, from Donna.
Okay,
I'm not sure what everybody else wants, but I would say put in asphalt parking.
I think that would be better than the grass parking lane. I think that just turns out to be a muddy mess.
okay. I'm skipping over some stuff here. Normally we look at up to 2 preliminary designs. They might mix and match a couple elements here or there. I think the big ones would be, you know, here's a typical section with some curb and gutter and sidewalk, and you can toss the curb and gutter and sidewalk if you don't want it. And then the other one would be this one-way street as an option. And it would have a different kind of cross-section and layout to it. Unless you're hoping for something different, we can ask for more designs.
What do people think about that?
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, I think that sounds,
Mhm.
The preliminary
That's good.
design seems like it should do it.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm just making a note to myself about that. And we looked at, should we try to look at stormwater management? That would have to go outside the right of way, I think. But we do have some city-owned land west of the road. And if the committee wants, we could look at some offsite stormwater management to help treat water from the road.
Is there a recognized issue with what they have today? Something you'd have to correct for?
I would say no, all of this just goes straight into the lake. We went through a different preliminary design in 2015 of just the northerly third of the road. And the concept at the time was that it was gonna be porous pavement that would infiltrate through media before entering the groundwater and going into the lake. But DNR regulations didn't allow that.
Mhm.
I'm not sure why that was pursued in the first place, but it was a pretty short-lived exercise.
I think it would make sense to see if there are any opportunities.
Okay.
I think, I mean, I would prefer it to stay, but I don't know how other people feel.
We usually ask, at least especially if there's some nearby city land, to look into it and see if we can find something that would make things better than what they are right now.
Yeah.
I would say that's fine.
I think that this is going to turn out to be a very costly project by the time we get all of these things rolled into it, I think, but
It might. Well, we'll find out, I guess. Then we had laid out 4 meetings in preliminary design, 3 of which would be potentially with committees, and the other one that would be with neighborhood residents and the aldermanic representative. I don't know, well, it might depend on water resources and CLC. If we have to get into neighboring land, some of that might be conservancy land, some of it might be parkland. So this might be PRFC instead of CLC, but in either case, Water Resources Management Commission would likely be involved if we're going to look at stormwater management.
That seems reasonable to me before meetings.
can those be joint meetings of all of those committees, or do those have to be separate meetings with each committee individually?
It's possible to do them together. It's a little bit difficult to do them together, just the way people's schedules are.
Yeah,
When the time comes, we can certainly check. I just at this point am not ready to promise anything, because if there's no quorum.
so what you were contemplating when you drafted this was one meeting with each committee, Public Works, Water Resources, and CLC, not multiple meetings with any of them.
Bob,
Correct.
I like your idea of trying to combine them, because there's clearly information that doesn't get brought forward in one committee that was very relevant in another one. So if we could get it into one, I think would be ideal.
Yeah, and again, I can ask, but there's no way until it happens that I can say anything one way or the other. So I pretty much need to tell the consultant, you better count on so and so many evening
Right.
meetings.
Yeah.
And if it's fewer, great. If it's more, we just pay per meeting.
Yeah, I think 4 meetings with one of them dedicated to the public, and 3 with various committees is the way to quote this, or have them quote it.
I think it's great to let the consultant know that we have scheduled this many meetings. You should include that in your costs.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's a swag from the consultant's standpoint. He may put in 5, the next guy may put in 2. So by defining it, it's the city's issue, not the consultant's.
Correct.
Yeah, that at least seems fair. Then if it turns into 6 meetings, they know they're just going to get paid
And it's
extra.
6, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay, so I'll just let that alone. I've drafted in here a construction staging plan to temporarily go out into Lake Street like we talked about before, unless there's reason not to. It might be a little bit controversial, but I think it's the only way to get some folks home at night.
I agree. I think it probably will be controversial, but it absolutely needs to be in there. Or we'll have, like you said, we'll be blocking people into or away from their homes during construction.
Okay.
okay.
Then we had during final design now 3 more meetings. And as I was starting to lay them out, it felt like a couple of them are going to be with the Public Works Committee, because we do final design approval, and then later we do an assessment public hearing and a bid award together as a second meeting. So that leaves open a 3rd meeting for water resources if we need it, for stormwater management again, or the Common Council. But if you think we need 2 committees or a committee and the Common Council, then that should be 4 meetings instead of 3. Again, we can always add. It's a little tougher to subtract.
Yeah, as long as we can add fairly easily. I think there's a risk that we don't have enough here, but you're right. They charge us, if we write 4 meetings or 5 meetings, that's what they quote and bill us for, and it's probably harder to take away than it is just to ask them to charge us for 1 more meeting.
I think that's probably correct.
So I'd leave it the way it is, but thank you for highlighting it.
Okay, I think that might have been the last of my highlighting. Yeah, so we just had a couple of dates and then a reminder not to skip the enclosures.
Sure.
Okay.
Carrie, did you have any additional questions? You had mentioned earlier something about sidewalks. Did you get your questions answered about sidewalks?
Yes, yep, I did. Thanks for checking. It was just that I do feel like we should, make sure to include that in, especially because of our policy that we're going to be talking about later. And I guess actually, I didn't say this, so thanks, Robert. I did want to just say that I think part of our policy we're going to be talking about later is, if sidewalks, if there's a specific constraint, right? And so I think that's where it's always great to have the designer look and note those constraints so that we've kind of done our part in investigating it. So, yeah, I think
that's really good input.
So at the end, is there a reason, you're going to give them a project location sketch? Is there a reason that you wouldn't give them the survey?
Oh, we would. We typically haven't done that right at the time of asking for proposals, but we certainly could.
Was it one big drawing?
I think it's 4 sheets, but it's a PDF. We do almost all of this.
You're going to send this out electronically anyway.
Yep.
Just a minor point. Phone numbers, you might well start adding 608 onto your phone numbers on your correspondence.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We're so used to consultants knowing how to get a hold of us, but seems like during COVID, everyone has long distance cell phone numbers that we have to call, even though they're, down the street. So, okay.
All right, are we ready for someone to offer a motion on this subject?
I'll move we go ahead with the RFP with the modifications that we've made, and I'll let Sean just briefly summarize those before we approve the motion, because I don't remember.
Sure, I'm just jotting myself a note here.
We need a motion.
This is Robert. I was going to second the motion unless Carl just did. I couldn't hear.
No, I didn't.
Okay, I'll second the motion and then, but yeah, I want to
Then we have a motion and a second, and Sean's going to summarize what the motion is going to encompass here.
So I'll say design works intended to constrain public improvements within existing street right-of-way and potentially within city-owned lands to the west. It's not intended for the city to acquire right-of-way from private property owners, but an amendment may be pursued for that scope of services if needed. Second item is the committee's open to potential paved roadside parking areas along the west side of Middleton Beach Road and along the south side of Mendota Avenue. I'm taking out the sentence about not contemplating design of curb or sidewalk, so that'll be kept in as a default option. The committee favors up to 2 preliminary designs, including wetland mitigation if warranted, and evaluation of opportunities for improvements to stormwater management within or near the project limits. The committee is open to the possibility of temporary vehicle connection to Lake Street during construction to be removed prior to completing the project. Include in the project scope 4 meetings with the committees and or public during preliminary design. Include in the project scope 3 meetings with committees and or the council during final design. Consider in preliminary design a one-way option north of Mendota Avenue with a parking lane and walking lane. We'll include as an attachment the survey, and we'll add area codes to our phone numbers.
Sounds
Where did
good.
that leave us with respect to the ribbon gutter? I thought there was a preference expressed for the ribbon gutter, at least on the west side of the road.
Yeah, by
Correct.
removing that sentence precluding it, will by default allow that in the preliminary design. Both curb and sidewalk will be included because I'll delete that sentence up here.
They wouldn't be proposing no barrier curbs, right?
Oh, no, that wouldn't work
No,
anyway.
not with,
It just
Okay.
won't work from a drainage perspective, but this sentence, it is not anticipated that the design will include curb or sidewalk improvements, will just go away.
okay.
Okay.
All right, are you comfortable with that, Donald?
I,
Bob, Robert?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion with respect to the motion? Everybody understands what it is? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and Sean, you can proceed to have that set out, I guess.
All right, I should have mentioned this was drafted by Sean Ellsrud, one of our engineering technicians, in talking with me. And I think he did a really nice job with it.
Is he here this evening? Is he tuned in?
He's not, but you know, maybe he'll watch it on videotape. You never know.
I'm sure it would be high on his priority list to watch it on video, but tell him he did a good job on it.
Yeah, yeah. I'll highlight that at the 1 hour mark. He can just cut to the chase.
Yeah. Okay. We are on to our RFBs at High Road and Camille Trail.
Right, yeah, out of the blue, I got a call from the associate principal at Cromery that they've been having all sorts of difficulty with curbside drop-off. They're apparently prohibiting drop-offs and pickups right at the school front door. And as kids are trying to cross the street, some of the other people driving through are having a difficulty yielding to them apparently. So he just said there's just a lot of screeching brakes and there's been one kid hit.
Oh,
What can we do about it? I thought, boy, I don't know. We've already tried legislating that people should drive well. That didn't work. So I don't know. You know, what he and I ended up talking about is maybe if we had a flashing sign to highlight that there's actually someone trying to cross the street, it couldn't hurt. I don't know to what degree it'll help. I mean, when it's busy at Cromery, it's really obviously busy. There's nobody that should think otherwise. But that was one thing we talked about. And so in talking through a couple of options, and I bounced them off of Luc Fouzard, who's the district alder, and also the police department, I had recommended option 2 of 3 options. One was to put in a budget request for new signs, but it would take a year. 2 was relocate one that we've already got. And 3 was defer installation from an intersection that's budgeted this year and install it here instead, and then rebudget later for the installation that's currently budgeted. Priority wise and use wise, I got the impression that the 2 that are proposed in this year's budget, namely on Park Street, right where the Pheasant Branch Trail crosses on surface, the valley corridor goes through there, And then the second one's up on Q at Bishop's Bay Parkway, just because there's a park across the street. It seemed that High Road and Keneal Trail was a better choice. Largely because High Road is very narrow and the sight distances are really good.
Sean, I had two questions about this. Did you have any discussion with the associate principal regarding a crossing guard?
I did not know.
I mean,
I was,
that's another option, isn't it? That might be, I'm just thinking about those, you know, I've seen how many kids come out of that school in the afternoon, and that flashing light's going to be going continuously for some period of time, I think, because there's always somebody there looking to cross. And that's fine, but I just think that's one likely result of an RRFB there, is that it's just a continuous operation for some period of time when school lets out.
Bob,
Mhm.
I think
I was-
school policy is crossing guards are at elementary schools. I agree with you, a crossing guard, I think, would be good there. But there are other times where that's also a problematic intersection, when just in terms of people going too fast, even with the speed limit things.
Bob, I was going to say the same thing about a crossing guard. And so I've experienced Cromway for the first time this year. My daughter's in 5th grade. And so she's still considered an elementary school because 5th grade is there, but they're located in the middle school. So I do think that a crossing guard is needed. So as I've been picking her up, I was amazed that there wasn't a crossing guard. I was actually looking for, where's the crossing guard? And when I have my daughter, when I pick her up, I'm like, okay, Lily, help me so I don't hit any children, because there are kids just all over the place running across the streets. And so I do think that the school, I was actually going to, email somebody at the school about this issue. Because at Elm Lawn, where my kids and my younger daughter goes, there's a crossing guard there, and it works really well. Because they stop traffic, right? And then they allow people to cross, and then they'll let the traffic go. It's super helpful. And I agree, Bob, that the RFB, I'm supportive of those, but I don't know if it would really solve the problem in this instance, because if it's just flashing constantly, I think people would, I don't know. There's just so much confusion in front of that school. I don't know if it would really solve this particular problem. It might, like you were saying, Susan, for other times.
Yeah, other times. I agree with you, because my granddaughter's there and I pick her up 2 days a week. And she's in 6th grade. So I've done it for a year when school was in session all the time. And now with all the pandemic stuff, that intersection is incredibly difficult. It's probably been made easier without allowing people to turn in and park where the buses are, because everybody just has to go straight. It probably needs both. And the school district needs to hear that they need a crossing guard.
I agree with that. I think, I don't know how quickly they can get a crossing guard in place. If we voted for instance, option 2 tonight, do you have an idea, Shauna, how long it would take to move the RRFB from High Road to Keneal?
That's a good question. If everything fell into place, it could be as soon as 2 weeks. I'd say within a month, it could be done.
Well, not to, people can continue talking and asking questions, but I would make a motion to recommend option 2 to move the RRFB signs from High Road to Keneal Trail.
It's from High Road and Keneal Trail to Donna Drive and Ravine.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for correcting my motion. That's what I meant to say.
Robert, do you want to include discussions to encourage the school district to hire a crossing guard for that point?
I
This has
feel like that's
been,
outside of the scope of us, but I'm not, yes,
Well,
I think we
I'm
should.
not sure. I have dealt with this as an alder in complaints ever since Cromery opened. It's a difficult street when school, before school and after school. Sean's description is, I think, rather tame. There are kids running across the street for the entire block randomly, cars pulling out, going both directions, cars doing U-turns in the middle of the street, cars pulling into private driveways and backing out. It's a mess. A crossing guard might help. And the other
I
thing,
wouldn't be
since-
opposed to that. Yeah, it is.
Since we
Things
did
get
not-
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, since we didn't approve the SROs and they had already budgeted, they should have money in their budget that could be transferred. That might be going a little far, but
Is, and I've got grandkids that go to that school as well. One is gone now, but there's still one there. Is that kids of that age are not going to go down and wait for the crossing guard. If they can get across the street faster in the middle of the street, they're going to run across in the middle of the street. That's all there is to it. You're not going to be able to keep them from doing that.
They won't respect the light either, I don't think.
No, probably not, but the drivers might respect the light a little bit. Could we look at the pictures that you had with this, Sean?
Sure.
Especially the
So-
next one, especially the one at Cromery, that one.
Bob, I do think that, yeah, while you're bringing that up, I just wanted to make a comment on that. I do think if there were the first couple days of school, they had teachers and staff directing kids where to walk. And there wasn't as
Oh.
much of the, at least in my experience, there wasn't as many kids running across the street because there was like, more of direction. So I think it might mean there's 2 crossing guards that are needed, right? Like to direct the flow. But I agree with you. There's probably always going to be some people that don't do it, but I still think it's worth us trying to encourage getting a cross guard because at least it would help. I think it would really help.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, if the city's doing its part by installing the flashing beacon, the school district ought to do its part by changing its policy to put a crossing guard there if one is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the benefit of the crossing guard is it can stop the pedestrian traffic and relieve the pressure of the cars.
Right.
yes.
Sean, my question about this picture was where you're proposing the RRFB to go is on the crosswalk nearest to us in that picture, correct?
Yeah, and sort of the tiebreaker, well, there were a couple things being considered. One, the street light is right here. So in winter, that's probably a better side to cross on.
Mhm.
2 is the on-site school's sidewalk that goes along the driveway and connects to the school is also on this side. So in theory, kids wouldn't have to walk across this driveway to get to this crosswalk. Unless they come out, the main front sidewalk and then walk down the street and then cross the street. Then they'd be on the good side of the sidewalk to do that.
The school is down farther from this, right?
It is, it's kind of in the background.
Right, that's the
Here.
school. So when kids get out, they're going to come out up on the other side of the far crosswalk there.
Yeah, they come down the middle mostly, right
So,
where,
so
yeah.
most of the kids are up here
Yep.
at this sidewalk and they're not following the.
Well, no,
the
they're
bus
following.
sidewalk?
probably
They follow
both.
All of them.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It
So-
just depends where they're going.
So at least my thinking was that this sidewalk is kind of continuous and on this side of the driveway. So there was the street light, there was the sidewalk, and then the last thing was, since these are solar powered lights, there's a pretty healthy tree right at this corner. And this sign at the northeast corner wouldn't get much sunlight to recharge.
Well, those are all good, solid reasons, but again, 7th and 8th graders know the shortest distance between 2 points. And if they're, they're not, in my estimation, likely to come down past where Ravine Drive comes in, cross the street and then go back across Ravine Drive to go down the other side of that street.
Yeah,
Well, the
I-
only
I
solution to
totally
that,
agree.
Bob, is East High School solution.
The fence.
Put, well, no, put fencing in the terrace.
Yeah,
It would kind of ruin that drop off to do
Yeah.
it.
well, and there isn't that much of a terrace either. You know, a good part of the area where they run across the street, there isn't any center island. Oh, you mean put the fencing between the curb and the sidewalk?
Correct.
Oh, on the north side of the street. Well, but there is no terrace area on the south side of Donna. It just is sidewalk all the way into the road.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where parents park to pick kids up.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they're probably not running across there. But
They
Oh,
are.
yes, they are.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
they-
are.
Yeah,
Parents park on the other side.
yeah, and they run
It
out
is.
between the cars that are parked there, and
It's terrifying. It is like when I'm pulling out. I don't know. There's
It's,
chaos. I've been there to pick up grandkids, and it is chaotic.
It's
part
to,
of, in spite of
to an
the-
adult who knows that people can die, it's terrifying. But to a kid, it's
Yeah, well,
it's probably exciting.
the school district needs a little more encouragement from maybe engineers like most of you are, that they need to have a teacher out there instructing kids about don't run across the street. They've done this at different times in the past. And I think they drop it every so often, but they clearly need to keep that up. And that's where the presence of a crossing guard will at least help, not necessarily controlling traffic, but controlling the foot traffic.
Yeah, if they're going to do that, it might have to be fairly permanent, because I know the police have done that on occasion.
Yeah.
And as soon as they go away, it's
It's
kind of back to normal.
right. They've got to do it permanently.
Perhaps Captain Kukuski could have a word with the associate principal about that too, that, coming from the police department, this is a dangerous situation and you need to do something with your staff and a crossing guard to try to make this intersection safer.
I like that suggestion, Bob.
This
Mhm.
just isn't the city's problem here. This is also the school district's got an interest in this.
Right.
So I'm happy to go back to my motion and say we recommend option 2 as written with all the correct streets listed. And in addition to that, at least Public Works recommends that the Cromrie School consider what else they can do with crossing guards to additionally increase the safety, for the students. I'm not quite sure how else to say that, because our scope here is really to do something with the roads and the sidewalks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was going to say we have a
Recommend.
pretty specific agenda item which has kind of a limited scope to it.
Right.
So I would
Well, I was
prefer if the
afraid of-
motion at least stayed within the bounds of that.
So, okay.
Yeah, but how do we get this message to the school district then?
I think as an alderman, you
Yeah.
certainly can make that connection. I
Okay.
don't, as staff, mind also making that connection.
Okay, I will call Dana Minot. Do you know the principal?
Yeah, it's Dom Ricks.
Yeah, I was going to say it changed since my Cromrie days. So
Susan,
Yeah.
I would like to get involved with this as well.
Okay, well, Carrie,
Talk
if
to
you'll
the
call the
school board
principal,
members.
I'll call Dana and Captain Kukuski. And Bob, if you would call some too, maybe we can get through to them. And anybody else that wants to get involved.
Yeah, okay. So I'm back to my original motion, which is recommending option 2.
Second,
It's been made and seconded. We were under discussion. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and Sean, you can proceed to move the RRFB.
okay. Then we've got, we finally got to it. Our discussion of policy about sidewalks in existing neighborhoods where we've had sort of a mixed bag of success in getting gaps eliminated. And it seems like we've been round about this a couple of times. The issue itself a little bit got mentioned in the comprehensive plan, but not in a definitive sort of way. I know the committee has previously, I thought really clearly, just said it's a default preference. They should be constructed where there's a discontinuity. At the very least, it is still our default policy to try to figure that out during preliminary design. The harder part always seems to come down the road of how are we going to get paid for it? And can we keep it all the way into final design? And I think it all comes down to a money issue. People have sometimes couched it in different terms. But it really, I think if it were low or no cost item, it probably wouldn't be as vigorously opposed most of the time.
Define low. I understand no cost, but let's say it was 50%. I would imagine that this last go around, they still would have complained and not wanted the sidewalks at 50%.
Yeah, and this last time we went through the issue, it still is all couched in trees, but there are no trees proposed to be cut down because of the proposed sidewalk.
It changed late in the game when it was mentioned that there were no trees being removed. Well, I can't afford it. I'm on a fixed income. I heard that at least 2 or 3 times during those discussions.
And I thought too, it was rational then to say, well, if everyone else has it in their mortgage, which is a payment spread out over 30 years, could we do the same thing here? That's one way to approach it. And frankly, it wouldn't be a 30-year bill. It's several $1,000s, but you wouldn't amortize it that long. And the other way to do it would just be to discount it up front and say, all taxpayers can pony up half and the property owner can pay the other half. And I did include a chart this time, and it's sort of brand new. The MPO was looking at a lot of this sort of thing anyway, and gave me a list of area communities that do their assessments different ways for sidewalks.
I like the idea of the city funding 100% of new sidewalk costs, because if we're looking at this as that it's benefiting the city, and it's benefiting all residents, because I think the issue that got brought up last time was that, it was near a park. And so you have other people that are using the park and then they want to take a walk. And because I've done that several times in that area, I've, started off in the park and then walked out into the neighborhood where I had to walk on the road instead of the sidewalk. And I don't live there, but I was, I would benefit from a sidewalk being there. And so I do think that if we 100% funded this, we would have more sidewalks in the cities. We wouldn't have all these people being opposed to this and changing our minds or influencing us, and we would have more of a walkable city. So I think if that's our goal, we should fund it.
Yeah, I think a percent funding, I think, would be fair. I don't know if it's fair 100% because individuals like me paid for my sidewalk on my mortgage. I got a new house and they got the Cadillac sidewalk out front, which is really nice. I wouldn't live anywhere else. But I think we end up with a fairness issue there if we do 100%, don't we?
I think so, but in a few years we'd maybe forget that, right? It always hurts at first, but then, I think that that's always the case for any kind of change, is that somebody benefits in the future and somebody didn't have that in the past. But again, if the goal is that we want a more walkable city, I think it should be a part of the city. And I think if other cities nearby us are doing this, I think there's a precedence for it. And again, it might upset people at first, but I think over time it would just benefit everyone.
I have a slight suggestion. The cost that we're assessing is not just for the sidewalk part, but regrading and all of that. What if we considered just the cost of the sidewalk, the same as sidewalk repair? That might be, and the city pick up the grading and those other costs. I would also like to suggest, and might be totally off the wall, but we come up with a plan, whatever it is, and have a referendum for the entire city to vote on it.
I was going to say that exactly, because
That
I don't
might-
think we don't have the horsepower we need to
Right,
influence this. We need a higher authority to give us the credibility here.
right. And if the whole city votes by a significant margin that we
Mhm.
do this, that's a real statement that everybody wants it and that more people are involved.
Yeah.
Wait,
I had one
I'm confused.
question about this too. Sean, do you have an idea, for example, of what the total amount that was assessed for the past couple of years for these kind of sidewalk improvements? And what I'm getting to is that money's got to come from somewhere.
Mhm.
And
Now,
that
do
it's budgeted for separately. So would I be correct in assuming that that's money that is going to go into paying for sidewalks and those kind of improvements rather than further improvements in the streets? And if so, how much money are we talking about?
That's the part I need to clarify myself. Are we talking about installing brand new sidewalks in existing neighborhoods that lack sidewalks? Or are we talking about all sidewalk construction and maintenance?
Right. Right now, any new development will have sidewalks, and the people who buy those lots pay for those sidewalks.
Yes.
I don't see a difference. I really don't.
Well,
One thing
It's a random idea. That's I think Susan and Robert, I mean, that's why you get paid the big bucks to make those decisions. It's not California where you want a referendum everything.
Mm-hmm.
Elected officials.
So there,
people who buy new homes that, the sidewalks are put into the subdivisions, they pay presumably for those sidewalks. They're also going to be paying now for installing sidewalks. If we decide as a city, we're going to pay for installing sidewalks in existing neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks now, those people are going to be paying for the other sidewalks as well. And I think number one, you're going to get some blowback from people who have been assessed for sidewalk improvements in the past, who are going to obviously want to make this retroactive somehow. And number two, I just wonder what the budgetary impact of that is, and would that have any significant impact on funds available for road reconstruction?
And that's the part I still need to wrap my head around. Are we talking about just new sidewalk construction where there is none, or all future maintenance on an annualized basis?
Well, I don't know. The people who made that.
I think our struggle that we're having is with new sidewalk in existing
Okay.
streets. That's our struggle. I think that's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
So
Yeah.
we don't run
So
into
I was
lot of-
yeah. I was gonna say, maybe there's a way to identify or do something like a comprehensive plan. Look at the sensitive areas and kind of put together, before this is, before we're in front of the, the people that are affected, put together a plan for the 10 hotspots we got, right? And in some cases, the plan might be, well, we're gonna narrow your road, and you're not gonna pay the full cost of the sidewalk because we're not building as much street, so there's an offset there. Or other places might be somehow make a judgment that it's more in the public good than just a regular residential street. This is connecting a park to a school or something like that. Then that would be funded at a higher level because it's expected, and it's not just the the local, you know, primarily for the local use. And then have that plan for these sensitive areas, you know, kind of assembled ahead of time. And then get that to be approved in some fashion. I think we hit these things one at a time, and we get socked down every time.
Dan,
I
I
wanna
think
say-
one of the things we need is good, clear information to be put out when we do give citizens the assessment. One of which would be explaining, okay, when developments are developed,
Mhm.
the owner of the property ends up paying the costs through the purchase of the land because the developer paid for all of it. A
Yeah.
lot of citizens are unaware of that fact. They think the city's building the roads, or like in terms of
Mhm.
parks, they don't know about park development fees that developers have to pay. So I think we do have an education issue here that
True.
needs to be dealt with regardless of what we decide to do.
Does the referendum kind of thing do that?
It could, if we provide enough information. It certainly did when we did the stormwater utility.
So
So
do you mean
I-
a referendum to go in and fill in all the gaps with sidewalk?
No, what I'm talking about, a referendum to decide, do citizens pay for it or does the city pay for it?
Oh, yeah, that feels like just a policy decision.
It is, but it also, it's whether you want to say, okay, that referendum passed by 80%. You're
Yeah.
a citizen that doesn't agree with that, but most of the
Yeah.
citizens do.
That's what I'm looking at the referendum for, to have the clout and the backing that we would need to make these decisions without, you know, hitting them one at a time and basically being up against the neighborhood on each one of them.
Would,
We need a larger body that's in favor of it to help us through.
and when we say the city would pay for sidewalks, I'm imagining that there would be, the city is that all citizens, like all residents of the city would essentially be paying, right? Like, isn't that
Yeah.
like, I mean, I don't know, like if the taxes would go up or something, right? We'd have to get the
Mhm.
cost from somewhere. And so I don't know if that would be part of the referendum, but
Well, that would be part of the referendum, that we could raise taxes X percentage to cover that. And that's how we did the stormwater utility. We had to do the stormwater utility by referendum, by state law, to be able to come up with the fee for the utility to fund it.
Well,
That would
except
be
if
what
it
the
were,
referendum would be.
if it were policy, we would just put that in as part of the capital improvement budget, really. I
Right.
mean, if we said we're going to rebuild the road, and oh, by the way, we're going to make the road narrower so that we can add sidewalk, it just all would be capital project cost.
Yes. And then council decides each year how much we're going to spend on capital improvements.
So much like we changed the policy to say if there's a route that caused, a terrace tree route that caused the sidewalk to displace, the city now will pay half that cost.
Mhm.
I'm not completely convinced about the referendum idea. I like it, but at the same time, I think if council approves this, that would be enough clout. I mean, they're elected representatives. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we would necessarily need that or not. It would be interesting to see if these other municipalities, how they went about doing the 100% of new sidewalk costs.
Are we going to have the developers filing a claim
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
building sidewalks?
I certainly
Well-
would be sensitive to the fact that, you know, I'm one of the people that's paid for my sidewalk already.
I think that's the bigger problem than developers. They're just playing by the new rules. I mean, old developers built roads that had 2 inches of blacktop in them. And we would never permit that now. But developers don't come by and say, oh, you won't let me build a 2-inch road. So we let somebody get by without sidewalk 50 years ago, but that doesn't mean we have to do it today.
I was just gonna say, like, rules change, things change. I don't think we'd have to worry about people coming back now and saying like, well, I paid for my sidewalk 5 years ago. I think we would say, yes, that the rule has changed, right? Like the policy has changed.
I think that certainly is what you could tell them. Whether they would be happy with that or not, I'm not so sure.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I understand that, but what, like, if they're not happy, what, I'm not gonna say like, what does it matter? But what, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, like, I don't know, like,
their argument would be that, you know, I paid for my sidewalk, let them pay for theirs. That's why
Right.
should the general taxpayer foot the bill for that?
and I
It just
think we
doesn't
would,
seem,
yeah, I think we would say, because our policy is that we want to make sure that sidewalks go into every community, and we were getting pushback on this. And this way, every resident of the city can benefit.
yeah.
Jerry,
I think it has,
to go further, we already are requiring anyone who has damaged sidewalk for whatever reason to pay for the replacement of that sidewalk. So I know I can speak specifically. I paid for the sidewalk when I bought the land. And then because the next door contractor destroyed my sidewalk, I ended up having to pay for replacing it when the city came in and did the sidewalk replacements.
Exactly. I think there's arguments on both sides of that. I mean,
There
and
are.
you're paying a contractor to clear snow from it every year and put salt on your porch. And,
Yes.
Why?
I mean, I get it, but I get Carrie's point too, that
Yeah.
if it's going to get the job done, I've paid for my sidewalk and maintained my sidewalk and repaid for it, and I'll pay for part of yours too if that's what it takes to get it here.
Why, Sean, why do we have people pay for maintenance of the sidewalk? I don't really understand that logic, actually. Or even like, you know, any of this, like where it's part of, you know, living in a community, everyone benefits. Do you know where that even started from? Like, because it's not that I can really take better care of my sidewalk. You know what I mean? There's not like, I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and as you see in this chart, you know, it's a mixed bag among communities, how they've chosen to apportion those costs. Some go all one way, some go all the other way, and a few go down the middle. But I can't say that one's right, one's wrong, or that there's even really a solid rational basis for it. These are literally policy decisions about how this should be done.
Sean, on your chart, when it says percentages of new sidewalk costs, is that adding sidewalks to areas that don't have them now, or does that also include replacement of damaged sidewalk?
I think the way the MPO put this together, it's a retrofit of sidewalks. So these are literally new sidewalks where they don't currently exist, not replacements of
Okay.
existing
So the
sidewalks.
replacement policy in the city of Monona or Verona or whatever might be completely different. I mean, they may
could
assess
be.
property owners for replacing damaged sidewalk as well.
It could be, and I can't even tell you with certainty that what the MPO got from input from communities was entirely clear to them. This is just the way they couched it in information they presented to me. But I would think that municipalities are reasonably consistent within their own setup for how they charge these things. I think the one potential downside of saying municipalities pay 100% of sidewalk costs is every time there's a hairline crack or something isn't quite the right shade of gray, I may get a phone call to say, come replace this, you know, because it's free, you know, and we may run ourselves ragged. We have the opposite problem right now where people, some people, a small percentage really, want to fight about everything. you know, that it's clearly a tripping hazard. It clearly meets our published criteria. They just don't feel like paying for it. And
I,
so
th-
that's
I think
not
that's
perfect.
right. I think that's where I would be more comfortable with keeping our existing policy of having property owners fund 100% of new sidewalks. If we consistently put new sidewalks in, you know what I mean? I think that's my issue, is that every time a community comes to us, there's always pushback, and it becomes gray, right? It becomes like a gray area. And or if we had certain criteria, and I think we've talked about this in the past too, that if there were certain physical constraints of like why there couldn't be a sidewalk placed, that would be the only exception. Or if we had, you know, a particular list of exceptions that were really clear. Otherwise, the sidewalks are going in no matter what.
Yeah, and that's easy for us to say, but until the council backs that up, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Sure.
Right,
Well, to
right.
recommend, I
I
mean,
don't think on the latest discussion with the Saks Woods people, it would have made any difference. I mean, the tree issue is clearly a smokescreen, And I think the cost is clearly a smokescreen. They're just looking for reasons not to do it. They don't want to do it. And I don't think it has, I mean, removing the cost issue, I don't think would make it big a difference.
Sean, I'm intrigued by the one notion that you had up a little farther in this document about, let's slow down for a second here. It's in the last part of this second bullet point, that if you allow assessment payments over a longer period of time, or having city finance a construction and then place a lien on the property so that it is in effect paid for by the property owner at the time the property is sold. Do you know of anybody that does that?
Not as a matter of policy, as a matter of practice, that happens if somebody doesn't pay their bill.
Right.
It'll go on their tax roll and it'll get paid one way or the other. I think this is an interesting idea. It tries to balance that, you know, gee, my sidewalk's part of my mortgage and I have a long time to pay that back. Again, if they've already entered into a mortgage, another couple $1,000s may not be the kind of 30-year payment we need, but I could see offering more than 3 years. You know, it might be a 7 to 10-year payback if somebody wants.
I just thought that the possibility of having the city fund it up front and then recoup the cost when the property is sold made some sense too. I mean, that's a long payback time in some cases, and it gives the property owner plenty of time to plan for it, that someday this is going to become due, and you've got to take that into account when you sell your property.
Right. In the meantime, it's carrying costs, you know, where we're going to have to charge interest on that as long as it takes. You know, I don't know how many people would want to take us up on that, frankly. If they could pay it back over time, why not avoid as much interest as they can? But it's an interesting option that we don't have right now.
So is that how the liens work now? If you you would not only pay the amount of the bill, but you would pay interest on that bill for as long as it takes to get it paid off?
Well, our assessments work that way. So our assessments have, there's a formula in our ordinance, but it's, I think, 1.5% more than our borrowing rate, rounded to the next nearest full percent up, I think. So even if somebody pays something back over 3 years on an assessment, it has that interest charge on it.
Okay. Well, that's not as attractive as I thought it was. If it was just going to be, you put the lump sum a lien against the lump sum and that gets paid off somewhere down the road without accumulating interest for 10 or 15 or 20 years, that might be more attractive to people. But if they've got to pay interest on it, I don't necessarily think it would be.
Well, and we'd have to set up a separate mechanism for that, because I'm pretty sure if assessments just simply aren't paid and no payment is made on them, then it just goes onto the tax roll and is collected as a charge against the property. So if it isn't paid as part of the taxes, I mean, then they start to get into sheriff sale kind of territory.
Mm.
The only thing I would add is that, you know, maybe there's some room for, you know, a percent of public funding of a sidewalk if it is a thoroughfare type, connecting a park to a school, or you know, major connections between public areas would constitute a partial payment by the city. But otherwise, I think in fairness, it's everybody has to pay a share of sidewalk.
So the one thing I liked about Carrie's proposal of 100% funding is it puts our money where our mouth is when we say we want to have a walkable city. We want to have people be able to bike and walk and do it and whatever on sidewalks. And for you know, for the city to pay 100% of new sidewalk costs, I believe that would just, as Sean mentioned, be added to the amount of money borrowed for road projects in any one year. And so it, you know, it does increase everybody's taxes a little bit, a tiny little bit. And we're no longer fighting this battle time and time and time again. And it's not just fought at Public Works, it's fought at multiple committees, bike, common council, everything else. So there's a lot to be said about going 100% funding of new sidewalks, even though, yes, if you bought a house a year ago or 2 years ago, that was out of your pocket, and going forward, it's more spread evenly across the tax base.
Yeah.
And if it's just for those gaps, there's at least an end point,
Yeah.
you know, where we say, you know what, the gaps have been eliminated.
Yeah.
And now we're
I
just
guess-
back to it.
Right.
We worked really hard to get our road budget up to a certain level in the city. And with that proposal, we've just taken away, and we don't know what the amount is because, you know, Sean doesn't have the numbers in front of him, but I'd be curious to know what road projects we wouldn't have been able to do in the last 3 years had we paid for the sidewalks and curb and gutter, because that's going to be part of it too.
Right.
Yeah,
So what roads don't we do these years? Because trying to get our road budget changed, like, it's
Don,
difficult.
we borrow 2 million every year for roads. It's what can get fitted into that 2 million.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't change. It's not like, oh, now we're gonna pay for sidewalks. So really we need 2.25
Right.
or
Yeah.
2,050,000, whatever the number is. So some projects not gonna get done.
Well, it could potentially though, right? I mean, that number is a budget number, or are we definitely limited? I mean, it'd have to be a change, right? Like
It
in
would
the
definitely
cities.
have to be a change, Carrie, and it was like pulling teeth to get it to 2 million.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It's
Yeah, I don't see
convincing
that going
council
up.
to increase taxes.
Well, and if you put credence in the surveys that the city has done over the years, at least as I have reviewed those, there's been a high preference for fixing the streets. I don't remember any citizen commentary or any issues made of paying for the sidewalk. City paying for the sidewalk. maybe that wasn't specifically asked of people, but that didn't seem to be a huge issue on the minds of the public, not anything like doing road repair and reconstruction was.
I don't know
And I
if
just
people
wouldn't be
understand.
comfortable voting to do that right now until we knew how much money we were talking about and how much money we were going to be taking away from street projects. I understand the points that Carrie made and Robert made, that there's some good things that would come from the city paying all of those sidewalks, but there is a price to pay for that too. And I'd like to know what that price is. And I think Carl made the point that in some cases, it wouldn't matter if we paid people to put in the sidewalks in those areas. They still wouldn't want them just because they are philosophically opposed to them. That would not have eliminated the objections that we got in this last go round. I don't think. I mean, that was much more of a philosophical argument than it was a money argument, I thought.
I had a couple people reach out to me in kind of, because we had brought this up a little bit, and they actually said that it would change their mind about sidewalks, the cost, if they didn't have to pay for it. They wouldn't have been as opposed to it. I think that cost is a major barrier for people. But I agree with you. In some instances, maybe it wouldn't matter. And I agree that it might be interesting to see what is the impact in terms of costs. I also just want to think about when sidewalks don't go in, I do think it's a safety issue, and I do worry about our, ADP compliance and things like that if we're not putting those in. And I think that if that's our goal as a city to make it walkable for everyone, as Robert was saying, I think it's something that we should consider. And if it does impact the road budget, but I don't know. That's a good question. How much does it impact the road budget? But I think that people don't understand. I think the reason why it hasn't been brought up of like, oh, the city should pay, is that they don't really understand until it impacts them, right? Like they don't know that they have to pay for the sidewalk until there's a maintenance issue or we have a proposal for a new road construction project. So I don't think it's on people's minds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
Carrie,
think
that's where I think we need to do a lot more education about all of these policies. And Bob brought up a good thing. We probably should, the next year when we do the annual survey, ask about sidewalks and educate people that as citizens, we're using sidewalks throughout the city, not just in front of our house. So when you go downtown to the bank, you use a sidewalk. When you go into a restaurant, when you go into the library, you're still using a sidewalk paid for by someone, by basically the citizens. And I don't think everybody thinks in those terms.
Might be a good question for the survey is.
Yeah, I think it really would.
And it would be a good question if you could tie it into how much money would take away from road projects. Would you
Correct.
prefer to have the city pay 100% of installing sidewalks in areas that now don't have sidewalks if that meant X number of dollars aren't going to go into road reconstruction?
And it's difficult to fill in that X because the Wood Road sidewalks that we're missing have a wildly different cost than the Mayflower Drive sidewalks that are missing. And that's very
also
different than the Brookdale and, Forest Glade sidewalks.
The percent paid for by the city has to be in line with the benefit to the citizens. It's putting sidewalks on a dead end road that serves just that street and having that paid for by the city doesn't seem to be on the same level as the ones on Mayflower Drive that connected the park to a main road. To me, there's a big difference there.
Public benefit, yeah, but if you're, say, on Brookdale, which doesn't get a ton of pedestrian traffic, but if somebody wants to pick up their child from Cromery and their child is walking in Brookdale because there's no sidewalk, it matters to them.
Yeah, that's a road that has a has a public use. It's next to the school.
It's not a cul-de-sac anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so it's always gonna be, where do we draw that line then? If we start
Yeah.
saying some are in and some are out, we need to know definitively why some are out.
hmm
I liked the committee's previous statement in that regard that just said there's a default preference that they should be there unless it's not feasible.
hmm
And then to that end, we just mentioned cul-de-sacs or some of these things, some of these little roads that have, I mean, the cul-de-sac is literally, you enter in and it immediately goes into a circle. Where's the benefit to anybody necessarily on something like that where you're, to put in sidewalk around basically just one big oxbow,
hmm
so
Yeah.
so I
If the city pays for that and all the aprons and road
well,
work
what the
and
city pays for it or the
yeah,
individual
or the individual.
pay for it, I still say there's got to be a little bit of common sense that goes into this decision about, I say the default preference is that sidewalks should be constructed where discontinuities exist. But I do in my mind have to say, if I see a really long cul-de-sac, sure, the people at the end of the cul-de-sac need to be able to get out to the main road. But when it's one of these cul-de-sacs it's basically, it's just a tiny little offshoot of the main road, I really do question whether the sidewalk on the cul-de-sac makes a lot of sense.
I think it
regardless
does.
of who pays for it.
I think it does because I live in a cul-de-sac and my kids use the sidewalk all the time because there's people that come in and out of their driveways, right? And they're just not expecting people in the road.
Okay.
So I think it just depends, right? I think that's the thing is that everyone uses it differently. I know what you're saying, Robert, that
Sure.
it maybe doesn't make as much sense, right? But I still appreciate that there's sidewalks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
and I
if you
can see for someone that's handicapped in a wheelchair on a cul-de-sac, it would still be nice to have the sidewalk.
Sure.
Yeah.
you still have to be a good steward of the public money, and there's probably road projects that would benefit more than some of the sidewalks that could be put in. This is a tough issue.
I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think I'm finished.
I was just gonna say, I like the idea though, that there is an end in sight, right? Like and that's where there's existing, I don't know where the math is, Sean, but it wouldn't be forever. And so I think that's the part that is maybe good to think about.
There are a lot of fights on that little map, Gary.
Well, look, here's one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every little red line means there are neighbors who are going to have different opinions about sidewalks.
Sure, but I do think, I mean, if we're willing to think long term, it's not a ton of neighborhoods, and we don't rebuild a ton of streets in any given year. So
No, that's true.
we
it'll
can
be
chip
a
away
fight.
at these a little bit at a time, and we'll make some progress.
We'll be having the fights for the next century.
Yeah, if we don't find a way to win the fight, I'll keep staring at this map.
Yeah.
Right. I think that is the thing, like in terms of the budget impact, I'm not sure if it would be as big as we were thinking, just because, like you said, Sean, we were kind of just chip away at these a little bit. I don't even know if it's every year.
Well,
No,
it would
lately it seems to be, but it's, not common that every year we run into this.
It would be just helpful for me to have some idea of what the amount of money we're talking about is, because I mean,
Yeah.
I think Susan and Robert both indicated pretty clearly they don't see much chance that the road reconstruction budget is going to go up any in future years. And that means that the money to do the sidewalks is going to come out of the pot that's already there. And
I
it'd be
think
interesting to know how much that might have an impact.
I think this short block of Mayflower, just because we most recently looked at it, had a proposed assessment in the ballpark of $15,000-ish. Moving the curb over, probably need to double that. So it's not a project breaker. Wood Road is quite a bit more extensive. So if we were talking about sidewalk on one side or both sides, it just has a really different scope to it and cost to it.
And
But
when you get to the next one that's going to come up over in that neighborhood is Columbus.
yeah,
That's a big street.
That's going to be expensive.
And that's
Right.
one, I've looked at that. That's one that has a lot of very large oak trees that are going to have to be wound around or taken down or something. Also, that one's going to provoke
That would be a street narrowing project though, also to tie in with Mayflower.
Yeah,
that's what we talked about anyway,
that's-
right?
yeah.
So if we narrow the street, we're basically building the sidewalk where it's already paved.
yeah,
right.
that's true.
And I think that's what I like about the idea of 100% city funded is that we can look at this a little bit more objectively. And if there are constraints, like on Wood Road, if it's just going to be too expensive and there's too many trees that would have to be removed, if there's still, some of those issues, then we can still evaluate it, I guess, on a case by case basis. And we just wouldn't have the influence of costs, personal stories coming our way.
That's kind of my position too. I think it's going to be a painful transition, but I also see the pain that we're going to see at least once a year, probably every single time we talk about doing some work in a neighborhood that doesn't have continuous sidewalks. It's going to keep coming in front of us. We're going to keep having battles. And then we just say, look, it's part of the cost of the city pays for streets. Why are sidewalks another form of transportation, right, for our city? Why are those excluded from the city budget for our infrastructure? We make households pay for that. I'm leaning toward pulling off the Band-Aid now as opposed to having that Band-Aid on for the next 30 years. And understanding that, yes, it means that our budget is having, our 200,000 or 200 million, 2 million.
That'd be
Thank you.
nice.
I know, the number's in my head, but it's not coming out of my mouth. The $2 million budget for road repair, in my mind, would be reduced for road repair, but it would be still $2 million for transportation infrastructure. Just we would now be including new sidewalks as part of that infrastructure.
And would you include future maintenance repairs
No.
by the same argument?
No, I would not, for the exact same reason you said. One, we'll get the very corner of this one square is kind of chipped. I need the whole thing replaced. No, we can't do that. It's got to be new upfront infrastructure. Anything beyond that has to be kind of pay as you go by the people who live in front of the sidewalk.
So you're saying you're only correcting mistakes made in the past. That's
I don't
all
know.
that's.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how I'd phrase it, but yeah, I'm saying I don't think we can take on the burden of repairing maintaining the sidewalks going forward at the city's cost, because then there will be some people who say, yep, I don't like the color of the sidewalk, or it's got a hairline crack, or whatever it is, or it's and then all of a sudden we're getting called out to fix things that
Don't need fixing.
Why isn't
And I'm
it the
fine
same
with that.
thing as putting in new for?
The main reason, again, is I think as a city, we are trying to say, this is important, this needs to happen. And I'm just looking at, our February 22nd meeting, and yeah, it was $15,000 spread out over 7 households. That's a big hit. Even if you say, well, you can pay that over 3 years, some of these houses are getting hit with, $1,000 to $3,000 just for sidewalks.
But Robert, that same thing in terms of repair. There are bills that are easily $1,000 for those.
I get that.
And the other, I guess I would argue in favor of the city paying for it because it's city property.
Mm.
It doesn't belong to the homeowner.
Yes, but I'm not willing to open up that Pandora's box, I guess is what it comes down to.
Is there certain criteria that's like evaluated? So if someone does complain like, oh, I have this hairline crack or the color gray, I mean, is there just for some municipalities, they probably have certain criteria, and some they just say, sorry, that doesn't meet the criteria for maintenance repairs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not suggesting we would go around replacing sidewalks because they're not meeting someone's sense of aesthetic. We have measurable criteria.
Yeah, so I don't know how much of a concern that would be, but I
just think it might be a staff time concern.
That's
Is
what I
someone
was
would
gonna say.
call a guy out to go look at it just to tell them, no, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, that's the problem I see, is that then you have a lot more times where people are calling the city out. City comes out. Now the city staff person who's out there is getting maybe yelled at. Well, what do you mean that doesn't, I think we would just be inventing problems for repairing old sidewalks. But I really do think there's a benefit to encouraging new sidewalks by saying the city's willing to pay at least a portion, and maybe 100% of that new sidewalk until all these little magenta lines are not magenta lines anymore on this map.
I think we also, though, if we go that way, we need to reassess some of those magenta or red lines, because there's clearly some in there, like along Tiedemann Pond on Gammon Road, where there's not even room to put a sidewalk in.
Well, certainly.
Or where they're truly unneeded because it's conservancy land.
And you're right. I mean, if it's not feasible, then it's not feasible. Or if it adds no value, that should be determined. And then maybe it no longer, it gets highlighted as there's no sidewalk here, but it's no longer considered ripe for putting a sidewalk into that section because it's, like I said, not feasible without tearing down a house, or it's not feasible without, whatever, paving over our ponds.
Yeah, and then we can just review that otherwise on a case-by-case basis, right, as it comes up.
Right. So I mean, I'm pushing so hard for this, not because I want us to think it all through and each vote our conscience, but I want you to know my position. I think there's a real benefit here to backing kind of some of the stuff that we were trying to say in the comprehensive plan, which is we want our city to be walkable. We want to encourage that. And I just feel right now that we're fighting every single time we talk about putting a sidewalk in someplace. I think we would make our lives a lot easier if we paid for new sidewalks up front.
Personally, I can't really respond to anything until I really have a handle on what the costs are and how that affects our $2 million budget. Granted, if it's only $10,000, $15,000, that's probably not bad, but it's still a good chunk of road that doesn't get treated, doesn't get the crack sealed, doesn't get something else done to it. And if roads are the key on everyone's mind in the city every year, and frankly, that's what the mayor runs on every year is roads. I think we've got to really strongly consider that. And as far as that concern about repairing sidewalks not being included, I would bet that the manager of that process has just as many complaints about why does this piece of sidewalk have a red dot on it that's going to get replaced. It looks fine, and I don't want to pay for it.
Get a
So,
fair number of those too. What's wrong with it? And
Yeah. What's wrong
we have a
with
whole
it?
web page of what's wrong with your sidewalk.
Mhm.
So that works both ways, but I mean, it just, to me, I've got to have a good understanding of what this is going to cost us from a road project standpoint.
Sure. And I value that. And I think you're right. And the only reason I'm personally drawing the line at flipping the maintenance issue on its head and saying, call us when you do want your sidewalk replaced, as opposed to the current strategy of call us when you don't want your sidewalk replaced, because we marked it with a pink dot and we're planning on replacing it. I think there's an inherent difference in the number of calls we would get. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that you're going to get calls either way. I just think it might be a matter of scale on the number of calls you would get, to come out and take a look at my sidewalk in front of my house because it's got a lip between these two pieces that's a quarter of an inch high.
Who's putting sidewalks on like Tribeca Drive when that gets put through? There's not sidewalks on that.
Developer.
The developer.
I think there was another idea at some point. I think maybe Susan, you might have had that, like when a developer does put in new sidewalks to charge a fee that would fund, that would then go into a fund that could also pay for these infill sidewalks. I don't remember who thought of that
No,
idea.
that wasn't
but-
my idea.
Okay. I thought that was brought up maybe last year.
Oh, I don't recall that either. I don't even know if it would be legal to charge them to build something
Right.
not associated with their development.
Mhm.
Sean, I have a question. How many calls do you get now of people asking to have their sidewalks repaired?
Oh, it's not a big number. Maybe 10 or 12 a year, where people are proactively saying there's something wrong with my
Yes.
sidewalk, come fix it and send me a bill.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a big number, I would say.
I'm sensing we're having difficulty coming to a consensus on this question tonight.
I think so too.
Do we need more information from Sean, like about the cost of what these repairs have been for the last 5 years for sidewalk replacements, or what they would have been? Since
Not
there's
all
some we
sidewalk
haven't replaced.
replacements. We're talking just about what they would have been added, where there are no sidewalks now, like Wood Road and Mayflower.
Wood Road and Brookdale and,
All of
yes.
those. I would find that helpful personally, but I mean, I don't want to make a whole lot more busy work for Sean either.
well, I think that's information we need for council also
I
to
agree.
help us.
I agree. It's going to be work for somebody. I think it probably needs to happen.
And
Is
would we,
it reasonable then to ask Sean to do that and at the same time defer this question until some point in time after we have received that information?
Yes.
And-
Sean, is that even a doable request in your
To
mind?
figure out costs of what sidewalk would have been had we built them.
Well, like in the example, like somebody did the work for Mayflower, right?
Mhm.
Could we, from the times that we've actually gotten engineering estimates for projects that we were doing, in this case, getting it quoted in 2021, and then maybe looking at the roads we worked on, it's gonna be a little bit of a wag.
But Sean, you
Yeah.
had some estimates because we knew that some property owners, like for Mayflower, were going to be paying $4,000. So that estimate we already knew.
Right, so I think for Wood Road, we had a cost estimate, which, we might have even had a couple of cost estimates, one side or two sides. In the Cromrie neighborhood with Brookdale and Forest Glade, we had a cost estimate for that.
Yeah, it's that information is
Mayflower
what
we
we
did.
need.
So if you just want sort of those three as a comparative, I think we already have that information.
That would be helpful.
I guess is there?
If
what
you
we're
want to look
really
at
looking, though,
Middleton
is
Beach Road,
an annual estimate of, and I know it's going to change from year to year, but I think we need is not just three disparate things, but to say, if we were to implement a policy like this, regardless of who pays for it, whether it's the city paying 100%, city paying 50%, and the resident paying 50%, or the resident paying 100%, what we have an estimate of, is that $20,000 to $30,000 a year, $50,000 to $100,000 a year, whatever, something like that, because that's basically what we're saying. How much money, if the city takes 100% of the cost of this going forward for putting in new sidewalks,
Sure.
how much is that $2 million being?
so if we want to look at it more at the scale of the 5-year plan, say,
Yes.
looking forward,
Yes.
in 2022, Middleton Beach Road will have a significant cost.
Correct.
In
Yeah.
2023, Lake Street will have a much lower cost. So some years it'll affect us greatly, and some years it'll affect us a little bit, and some years it won't affect us at all.
Right.
And we can get those numbers. I don't know what we'll do with them because there's no average annualized cost unless you just want to look at the snapshot of the 5-year plan and annualize that.
I think that would work, Sean.
I think that would be fine.
Yeah.
That gives
Okay.
us some idea.
Yeah, because it's going to be a long time before we get to Baskerville.
Mhm.
So we're just not going to look at those sidewalks for a very long time now.
And Pheasant Branch Road is another one. And whether we even,
Yeah, We
we've got
did design
trails at the
sidewalks along-
Conservancy.
we did design sidewalks along Pheasant Branch Road, but at the time, I think it might have been the Finance Committee elected not to fund that design.
It was council.
Council? Okay.
Yes.
And the Public Works Committee didn't want to propose a different design. So we're not doing anything with Pheasant Branch Road.
Right.
I have a question about the $2 million budget. That's the target, or it's our budget, our target. How long is that in effect for? Indefinitely?
Yeah, pretty much. So just so
Oh.
you know, for these types of expenses, what do we have, Susan? Like 3.5 million a year to work
Yeah.
with?
Let me explain it a little more.
Thank you.
We've got an operating budget and a capital budget. State law has prohibited us from raising the operating budget even for inflation. So that pretty much stays the same every year. There's a few little things that can increase it. The capital budget, we can borrow pretty much whatever council decides. So it was the year before the mayor was elected, council decided to start paying $2 million a year for roads. Before that, finance and council just decided what they wanted to fund that particular year. So we've been pretty strict for the last 5 to 6 years on staying at 2 million. I think we've gone a little bit above that this last year or two. We raised it, the total amount from 2.5 to maybe 3 million. I don't know the exact numbers. But that is up to council and finance.
But what I would add to that is, so we get requests, there's all sorts of money, but a lot of it's already spoken for. So every year in, well, it ends in November, but from August, September, October, and November, we're talking budget issues. And we get requests, capital requests for, I think it's in the ballpark of around $7.5 million.
Oh, it's more than that
Was it more than that?
sometimes. Yes.
Okay. But
So we get requests from
Yeah.
parks, conservancy lands, the library, the senior center, the police department, the fire department, all of those.
Yeah.
And we get
And we
what
have to decide.
what we have to spend every year for these allocatable expenses or whatever is 3.5 million.
But that's
2 million,
our own decision, but
to an extent, yes. But
it is.
so-
We can go higher according to state law.
Right, but at some point well, I don't want to get into the details, and Susan knows this better than I do anyway, but I'm just trying to give you a scale. 7.5 million in call it maybe a typical year of requests. We only have 3.5 that we can spend money on, 2 of which is the road, which only means we have 2 million on road and 1.5 million for everything else. And we're cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And it's very painful. And
Yeah.
we never can pay for the things that people want us to pay for because there is a limited budget. So I wanted to give you that scale of $2 million out of 3.5. We're putting, more than half of our capital budget that we can, play with as to
Mhm.
where it goes. We're spending more than half it on the roads right now. And if we're cutting into that 2 million, it's not like we're going to say, oh, well, let's just pull it from someplace else because we're already, the majority of that money is going into the roads. There's not like another $20 million elsewhere floating around that just take a 100,000 out of this other budget. It's like, there's not going to be coming any more money to the roads than this $2 million, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah,
That helps, just because I was going to say, if let's say the extra to pay for these sidewalks is $30,000, could we do that? Right? Could we say our budget is 2 million and 30,000?
Not realistically, no. It's going to decrease the $2 million rather than get the added $30,000 from an outside source. I would think.
Yeah.
I think when it's that close, we probably could say, well, because in any given year, we have to balance some of these different road projects.
Sure.
And so
Mhm.
Yeah.
sometimes it's a difference of, well, then we need to take off half a block, or we need to drop an entire street, or we need to do a little bit less, surface seal kinds of maintenance work than we ordinarily would. So instead of $250,000 of chip sealing, we do 220 because this road project needs an extra 30 that we just can't figure out elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, before we committed to this 2 million, we were not spending anywhere close to that on road repair.
Correct.
Why we're
In fact, the
spending that
entire
amount
city
now.
capital budget was $2 million for all departments, for all activities.
Right.
And that
And
wasn't
other
very long
departments
ago.
were getting quite a bit more.
Yeah. Okay, that's good context to have. And I
So,
think that
Sean-
will help with what you guys are asking Sean for. I think that makes sense.
If we're not going to take any action on this item, do we need a motion to table it until such time as you provide the additional financial information we've requested?
I
And
think
if
that'd be
so, on
helpful.
the motion?
Sure.
I'll second Don's motion. I think I think we've talked this one to death for tonight.
Well, I think we got a lot of useful information, though, and have a better handle on where we might be going with it. But we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on this issue? Hearing none, those in favor of Don's motion signify by saying aye.
Uh,
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And Sean, I hate to give you another job, but hopefully we can get back at this in the relatively near future.
Yeah, I'll put that right on the bottom of my list of things to do.
Okay.
All right, one last issue on the agenda is just an informational one about the MG&E rates.
Yeah, this is just
Street
kind
lighting.
of FYI more than anything. Our customer service rep at MG&E just sent a note out, just letting us know this is happening. I'm not even entirely clear on when it's happening, but I just wanted to get this information to you to let you know that they're effectively collapsing 3 different rates schedules into one, just for general street lighting, and not worrying so much about, you know, is it company owned and maintained stuff, or customer owned and maintained stuff, or things that we as the customer own but they maintain, and just saying, you know, we're just going to turn on street lights. It's not quite that simple, of course, and they went through a whole exercise for us to give us comparative costs based on the kinds of fixtures and lights we have in service right now, on a 1 month snapshot. They did a comparative. In fact, I think this is probably a better view. And then they sort of annualized that instead, so you can see what we're paying in a month or during a year. And they think for the profile of the equipment that we've got now, our bill would decrease slightly, probably offset by about the annual rate increase.
About $2,000 we can spend on sidewalks.
2 squares.
It hasn't even materialized yet. So anyway, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. I have talked with Kelly Hilliard, who's our sustainability coordinator, just in terms of trying now to take a look at our overall street lighting profile and figure out what we might be able to do even better. You know, when it was a certain, you know, flat rate for a certain kind of bulb, our options were a little bit limited. We didn't make out very well on LEDs until they're metered. And I don't really understand this whole rate yet. So I want to talk with our customer rep about LED stuff in particular.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you can't answer this either, but under company owned lamps, when it says a facility charge per month, LEDs are, you know, almost double what non-LEDs are. And it's like, okay, I get that initial cost to put in LEDs is more expensive, but once you put it in, why is there a monthly charge that's so much higher for LED facility, you know, lamp facility charge? So if you're asking those same questions, that's good, because I would like to have somebody explain that to me. But
LED should last longer too, I would think.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, they do, much longer.
Right.
So I don't know if they were trying to make up that since they don't use enough energy, they got to get paid somehow for these things.
Yeah.
So they just put it into the fixed side of the equation instead of the variable
that may
side.
be what's happening, but that's not cool.
I will be sure to let Jesse know that that's not cool.
Thank you.
It's only a guess. I mean, I do want to talk with him though. He's a really, really good guy to talk with. I just haven't been able to arrange that.
Sure.
But at least I wanted to get this out there that this is a pretty significant change. Scheduled, not necessarily cost-wise.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you, Sean, for that. Anybody have any other questions or comments regarding this item? If not, I think that brings us to
The end of our agenda, really.
if
Yes.
anyone's still alive, they could make a motion to adjourn.
I feel like I've talked enough, but sure, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, is there a second to Robert's motion? Oh, come on, somebody.
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for what was a long meeting, but very informative one, I thought.
I agree.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.